We'll call to order the meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Tuesday, January 21st. Looking for an opportunity for an approval of this agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Eleanor, do we want to adjust this as a?
No, December 17th in a sense will need not to be tabled because they approved the previous minutes that I want to correct. So
Okay.
we should probably table.
Okay, so
Just
we'll.
to be like uber.
Yep. So we'll table that to the next meeting.
Do you want me to explain or?
I think it's okay. There's some edits forthcoming to past minutes.
You want a motion?
If you're tabling, you can make a motion, yeah.
I'll make a motion. I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Item number 4, updates. There's been a lot of activity off island. Tucker, can you update the group? And on island.
Thank you. Tucker Holland, Municipal Housing Director. So as far as the State House goes, there have been a couple of events, if you will, related to that recently. There was a press conference a couple of weeks ago that Ken Brogren spoke at on behalf of the coalition version of our local housing bank bill. Now communities like Boston, Somerville, Concord, Brookline, Provincetown, and others have all adopted a similar measure to ours. And so there's strength in numbers, and we're working on a statewide version, basically, where every municipality can opt in, and there's a little more latitude as far as the percentage and where the threshold starts. I'm sure there's going to be some going back and forth with the legislature about this, but the focus right now is trying to advance this local option bill. And in conjunction with that, I went up and testified last week, I think it was, and there probably were 400 or 500 people in the room, 150 of which were speaking on behalf of this and one or two other pieces of legislation they are taking up. So it feels like there's some definite momentum toward trying to make this happen. As Penny and others in the real estate world know well, the Mass Association of Realtors is fighting this quite vigorously, but we are cautiously optimistic, put it that way.
I have one question.
Yeah.
With it becoming a statewide initiative, are we looking at one large fund that would then be distributed to the
No,
municipalities?
it's a local.
It'll stay local initiative.
Like we could do exactly what our local bill does under the statewide version. It's
Great.
all local option. The money stays locally.
Unlike the water quality one, where all
Yes.
the money goes in and then gets
Correct.
dispersed. Okay,
Exactly.
great. Awesome. Anybody else have any questions on that update? Or no?
I'd just like to comment that we were at the housing stakeholders meeting, and we do have an offer from other people who are stakeholders in the housing initiatives to garner some kind of public, letter writing, email writing, some kind of campaign when the time comes. So, we're sort of poised for the moment where it makes sense for us to reach out to the community and say, send an email, which is what Mara's done to their membership.
Great.
So,
Tucker, thank you for representing us there and the update.
I think Brooke is going to tackle the next item.
So Dave and Penny and I did the presentation of Neighborhood First to the select board. Was that last week? Feels like
Two
weeks ago. 2 weeks ago.
already, yeah.
Feels like 100 years ago. And it was well received by the select board. There was some public feedback from the audience, and there was a little back and forth. But overall, I think we have good support from the select board on the direction we're going. And you guys?
No, I just
have anything?
wanted to mention also that Peter Hoey was there, but I feel as a member of that committee,
we did what we were tasked to do, and then it went poofed. And like, did anybody thank the people that served on that committee? It just sort of dissolved.
Fizzled out.
I don't know that it dissolved, no, I don't think that there's an
I
official
think there
thank you
needs
that
to
has
be-
come along, and I think that that's a great
I think there
idea.
has to be
Yeah, not-
the polite thing to do, because people gave time and traveled, and
I mean, it was tough with Rick kind of jumping down our throats
It
immediately
was-
after our presentation.
was
which I
difficult.
think kind of skewed the balance there.
but I just
And-
think that the people who served on that committee need to be acknowledged individually, just a letter from us.
Great.
Great idea.
I can grab something if you want and have you sign it.
Thank you.
That'd be
great.
excellent. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Eleanor.
Now, that, if I understand correctly, that committee is not dissolved. It is just on hiatus until a
Hiatus.
new request
Okay,
is
but-
made of them.
See, I wasn't even aware
Aware
of
that
that, and I'm
right.
on the committee, or was on the committee.
That is the case, right, Tucker?
Yeah, I mean, I think we
Well,
did.
that was emailed.
We did publicly thank the committee I think when they came and gave the presentation to you all, we made a point of, from the microphone anyway, but I totally agree with the idea of sending a personal or an individual note to the members. But I think, as Brian was pointing out, technically the group isn't dissolved. The trust had always said, we may want to go back to that group for further input.
Engage
Yeah.
them. Okay, the perfect opportunity. Thank you for what you've done so far. This is the current status.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Item number 3 on updates, data project follow-up, scope of services.
You just very briefly, we have furnished the list of questions and comments that the board had put together, or contributed individually. We presented them en masse to NDP, and they're working on follow-up on those.
Great, thank you. And then there was a previous discussion about a housing forum helping fund Ripple Effect to get something up for the spring.
So upon further review of timing and so forth, Tucker and I, as representing Ripple Effect, have decided to move it to a little bit later in the maybe late spring, early summer, to maybe capture some of our seasonal or 6 months residents, as well as to appeal to the speaker who is from the South and really was not thrilled about the idea of coming to Nantucket in March. So, and also, the timing right before town meeting seemed valuable, and then it seemed like a huge time crunch. So,
Makes sense.
more to come.
Great. So seeing that's the last one, we'll close item 4, look to item 5 for draft financials.
Yeah, and those are still basically in process. We've gotten, may have mentioned previously, but we had the opportunity to finally connect with Bob in the finance office and kind of gotten him a little more oriented toward the different buckets of money that we have that have the different restrictions with them, and am in the process of working with him on really looking backward and assigning the different expenditures the trust has made over the last couple of years to the appropriate bucket, so those starting balances are correctly reflected within the Munis system. So we will have that for the next meeting.
Great, thank you.
Excuse me.
Yes,
I have a
Penny.
question, just while we're on the subject. The $5 million that was voted
Yep,
from the CPC?
correct.
Okay, can you just, that keeps getting dragged into discussions of the Neighborhood First project?
Yes,
It's not connected in any way to that, is it?
it is not
Thank you.
connected in
Can
any
you
way to that.
clarify what it's for?
That is, the trust had previously gone to the select board about the need to have funding available for land acquisition to serve organizations like Housing Nantucket or Habitat, or to do its own RFP type project. So the select board really tasked the finance director with, okay, we want to provide at least $3 million to the trust for those purposes. And in working on a solution there, the finance director had worked closely with the CPC to come up with the $5 million bonding. And folks here, including Brian and myself, had been part of working with those two folks or organizations on putting together the $5 million.
Was part of it also to enable this group and the select board to be more nimble in acquisition than requiring a town meeting vote?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Which is mutually exclusive from the neighborhood first funding, because the assumption was we needed two different articles in case one of the two didn't pass.
And
And
the
The
source.
the bar is different on what you
That's
can
right.
use it for.
Absolutely.
And the restrictions apply to the property.
Exactly. CPC funds can only be used for projects up to 100% AMI.
Right.
So if you're using those monies to acquire a piece of property, there can't be anything on that is over 100% AMI.
Got it.
And I think a principle of the Neighborhood First group and this group has been serving a range of incomes.
Thank you.
Great, okay, thank you. 2020 update of the housing production plan. We're in need of an update coming soon. You wanna?
Yeah, I just wanted to plant the seed in 60 seconds or less that our current housing production plan is good through October of 2021. So we do have a little bit of time here, but folks who were on the trust at the time a few years ago when Judy Barrett had assisted us with the last update, it takes some time. And so I think we may want to consider at our next meeting putting out an RFP for someone like a Judy, doesn't have to be Judy, but someone like that to assist us with the update of our next HPP. And one of the principal advantages of having an approved housing production plan is it cuts in half the number of units a community needs to reach safe harbor.
Great. Thank you. The next item we'll take a little bit of time for conversation. The draft RFP for properties under Neighborhood First program. So the goal is to get out an RFP in February to find out who has properties out there that we can begin to work with. So Tucker's put together this draft. It's going to take some work to get out the door today. And then with continuous effort up to the next meeting on February 18th.
Yeah, so this RFP, you can see this is just kind of an outline. On the front page, we're talking about issuing the RFP on February 19th, I believe, and we're in the process of confirming this, but I believe things get posted to the central register in the state on Wednesdays. And so your next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February 18th. The idea is to have something that we could approve and post to the central register following your next meeting. In this, working outline, we've talked about giving folks a few weeks to come back with any inquiries, which is a typical opportunity with an RFP. We've set that date at March 11th at present. And then here we're suggesting that people need to respond by April 2nd. So that's giving roughly 6 weeks for people to respond to the RFP. The RFP itself, in this case, like with Six Fairgrounds, it was quite a lengthy RFP with a lot of attachments and background information and so forth. The body of this RFP should be relatively short. I mean, it's just there's some perfunctory things that need to be included in terms of where do you send your response and other aspects that are similar. But the main event of this RFP is really the comparative evaluation criteria. And so if you turn to the third page, I've begun to outline what we would consider having as the comparative evaluative criteria. And in each case, you need to have a description of the criteria itself, and then what does it mean to an applicant for their property under that criteria to be judged either not advantageous, advantageous, or highly advantageous. And so I've put in just a couple of examples. So one of the criteria these are intended to capture all the criteria identified by the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee. So as an example here, one of the criteria was proximity to other SHI listed units, actual or existing and planned. And so we say simply, one of the intents of the Neighborhood First program is to spread affordable workforce year-round housing across the island. So not advantageous here would be a property is located within half a mile of existing or currently planned SHI eligible units. Advantageous would be a property is located between half a mile and 1 mile of existing or planned units. Highly advantageous would be where a property is located more than a mile from the existing or planned units. So those are ideas in terms of the numbers, in terms of mileage apart. But this is the type of format that ultimately the RFP will need to have. So it will be very clear to the applicant or proposer how they will be judged. So the intent, if you all agree, is would like to have someone from the trust designated to work with Ken, and Ken apologizes that he can't be here right now, but to work with Ken and I on fleshing this out a bit further. We would then circulate to the entire group for individual feedback through Eleanor, and then we would take that feedback, consolidate it, and have both town council and the finance/procurement department review so that you would have a finished product, if you will, for your February 18th meeting. And I have a nominee.
Okay, great. Would we like to hear a nomination
Well, I think
or a volunteer? Why don't I look for?
Somebody else wants to do
Yeah, why don't we look for a volunteer first?
I'll volunteer.
excellent.
Great.
Good. Yeah, I
Perfect.
think it should be somebody that served on Neighborhood First because you understand, what was going on with that best.
And in the real estate business.
Yeah.
I concur.
Okay, I'd be happy to do it. And this is not this is a task-oriented
Yeah,
thing,
Yeah.
and then it's done.
it's it.
Correct.
Make a motion.
For Penny to be
The representative to work with Ken.
Ken.
Great. Is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor?
I
Great.
thank you, Penny.
Thanks.
So again, you all, the idea is next week, really, you're going to get this draft for your individual input. And we really would value anything anyone wants to add to the document.
I will deliver by next week, but the one thing that's jumping off the page to me
Yeah.
is not advantageous. Makes me not want to submit
Right.
a.
Less advantageous?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
maybe less advantageous.
This
or-
is, I can investigate that, but this is really like a state format.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the pro forma one
Yeah.
that's done.
Okay. Yeah. Just the negative term use
Can we
makes
do
it.
with like smiley faces?
Seriously. Yeah.
That pain scale in the hospital.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Let's do 1, 3, and 5 on the pain scale.
Can't be numbers. There's a whole thing to
Okay.
this.
Right.
All right.
And I mean, one of the things that isn't, so if you all, I would, if you have a chance, just look at the list of things, and if you have any thoughts, let us know. But like one of the things that, as an example, Brooke and I were talking about a little bit is one of the criteria that the Neighborhood First folks identified was susceptibility to delay. So that is, in some ways, it's a kind of a qualitative assessment, but we need to describe what that means in each of those 3 levels. So I guess put your thinking caps on in terms of how you might be thinking about the scoring for each of these criteria.
When Neighborhood First was working through this, was there any discussion about zoning
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
lot sizes, and should that be one of the criterias? And then also resources and natural resource impacts.
Well,
The zoning's on.
So that is one of the things here is the potential number of units under existing zoning
Okay.
is a criteria, and that, like, the example here is less than 3 units, not advantageous. 3 to 5, advantageous. More than 5, highly advantageous. Again, we can play with what the answer is, if you will, under each of these, but these are just meant to illustrate how we need to be thinking about it.
There was a commitment on a part of Neighborhood First to try and work within existing zoning.
Yeah.
One thing I don't see on here that I've been concerned with from the start is scale, and I know you have appropriate for density. I'd like to add the word scale in there.
We can definitely add it, and we just need to think about how we are explaining that in terms of the scoring to someone.
Defining it.
Because, yes, because someone could interpret scale as, I have nothing to do with the scale of what you're going to build here.
Right.
So we're trying to get as objective, like the potential number of units is sort of a fairly objective
My point
number.
is, it was a huge, big deal in
Yeah.
our discussions, and I don't want it to get lost. The other thing is energy efficiency, or
Yeah.
potential for
in
that
there.
needs to be on. We need to make sure everything.
Energy
Yeah.
and efficiency is
did I
on
miss
here.
it?
Yeah.
I
Apologies.
missed it
Yeah.
too when I
Yeah,
was.
okay.
Yes.
I mean, you know that I'm the
I
biggest,
know you are. Oh, here it is.
have the biggest problem with scale. But I think, who's filling this out?
The,
The person.
The property
The
owner.
property owner. So how can they
No.
judge scale? They don't, that's not something that they.
I think that's more on the outgoing
I
RFP
thought
that
we
we're
were going to
sending
be
out.
filling this out.
well, we are defining basically what score you get depending where your property falls. But I think Dave is kind of saying what I was trying to say, that scale, we definitely can incorporate it. But I think someone may say, well, I own a property, you can develop 5 units under local zoning. Like, I don't know the scale of what you would build here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think my understanding is this is fair notice of the criteria on which the submissions will be evaluated. They are not evaluating the
Right.
submissions.
No.
No, we are.
Right.
You guys are. Yeah.
And that's my concern, and kind of the use of negative terms, that they don't do the evaluation and not submit on their own, right?
Right,
So
we
how
have
do
to make
we?
it clear in the RFP, they're not expected to evaluate, but this is the criteria by which every submission
Yeah.
will be judged.
That's why the definitions have to be objective.
Yeah, I
So
understand.
they're just giving us data.
Yeah.
And we're deciding how to rate the data.
But this is
Positively or
constructive
negatively.
notice of,
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, of
This
how
makes it
might-
very clear that
looking for.
what we're looking for, so it's not an arbitrary decision. And it has to be produced basically like this.
In this format.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
So, yeah,
Well-
I think that the timing, the schedule's great.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Tucker. That'll move us to item 8, communications plan for annual town meeting.
That's me.
Kick that over to Brooke.
So I've been I keep bringing this up at every meeting, and I think, and as things progress, it evolves a little bit as to what we're talking about. So I had 2 thoughts in particular. One is a lot has gone on around Neighborhood First and where we are, where we're going, where we are in our process, and that I thought it would be valuable to the community to hear, for us to get the information out there beyond speaking at a select board meeting. And so I'd like to invest some funds in some public outreach, social media outreach, hiring someone to craft that and push it out. And the 2 things are and then the other thing is Housing Hub we didn't get a grant that we were looking for, and we've talked about allocating funds for it. But to me, the very first question that needs to be answered is is an infrastructure question. If we're going to have a website that differs from the one we have right now that's part of the town website, how does that interface work? What's the mechanics of what we can and can't do with regard to the public infrastructure for media and internet presence? And I thought it would behoove us to hire someone who is an expert in that kind of work to have the conversations with the folks in town government who are responsible for this, and to figure out, we can imagine something, but can we do it? And to answer those questions. So those are the two goals that I would have. And I would think that this would likely be a, less than $10,000 enterprise. And what I was hoping to ask is for this board to allocate up to $10,000 to achieve these two goals, and then maybe put together a small work group to find the person who would do one or both of these and feed them the information that we want to get pushed out to the public on the first goal. So, thoughts?
I have a question. Would there be a deadline on this?
Yes, I mean, this would be immediate. I mean, I think prior to town meeting in particular is the...
Thinking about the second point task, which sounds like the longer working effort, and not maybe potentially to happen by town meeting. One of the things I'd like to understand is expanding the first one, and what's the marketing plan to educate everyone? Whether is it a print ad campaign? Is it the flyers to be distributed? Are there infographics? Are we taking Yankee ads? Those kind of things. I'd like to focus as much attention in that direction, because the other project sounds like a 6 to 8 month long project, as much as I'd like it to be 30 days.
No, it's just doing legwork. It's just, getting information. It's not, building anything.
Oh, okay.
So not
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
That wasn't clear to me.
Yeah.
It
No,
sounds like
it-
you want somebody to make the
It's just
steps
a-
to get ready to start either improving our existing site or building a new one.
I want to know what we can and can't do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like literally, structurally, technologically, interfacing with our existing webs, legally, all of the above. I want to report on, okay, we have this idea of a housing hub website that we think we're committed to. Can we, what are the limits on that, really, is what I want to know. And then, and that's the sort of question one.
I wish we grabbed IT while he was here, because it feels like we could have
It's
learned
really,
a lot.
It's really two separate things.
Yeah.
I mean, my big concern right now is educating as best as we can the public before town meeting about where we are. And then I agree, the other needs to be done, but I don't think it's as under such a deadline as town meeting.
I would agree, but I don't want to, I'm not talking about a 6-month horizon for this
Yeah.
website piece. Because I think this first tranche of communication is about where we are, and then we're going to be moving really fast. RFP is going to go out, property acquisition, project planning. We are going to need a vehicle to get information out there. So I think
Yes.
the website's got to come pretty quickly thereafter as a host site for all of this information that's going to be forthcoming in the work that we do in the next. So it kind of has to come before, it has to be being created as we're doing the work. And when we start doing, developing the pipeline of unit creation, making sure that there's that goal of one stop where people can go and get information about what's going on.
So for the financial side, the up to 10,000, is that for actually creating something or hiring someone to tell us what we can or can't do?
Maybe it's two pieces. Maybe what we need to do is allocate money for communication and then allocate a smaller amount of money for just analyzing that question.
I think that's break it into two separate products.
Okay.
Tucker, I've seen you come to the mic.
I just was good. Thank you. I was just, kind of in the vein of communicating different things, and I apologize for not maybe mentioning this earlier in the updates, but you all are already aware, but maybe for our viewing audience, the Six Fairgrounds project received its favorable decision by the appeals court since our last meeting. So that project is now basically commencing. It won't break ground for a little bit with the timing of the financing, but the team of developers and the folks on the town side who are responsible for the infrastructure, water, sewer, road, et cetera, we are gearing up and planning for the breaking ground of that coming up.
Great. So, Brooks, coming back to kind of where you are here, do you see a way to kind of break this up and the idea or the request, so we can look for a motion to get us to a well-marketed town meeting while moving the other process forward?
I mean, I don't know, because I'm not a social media expert, but I'm thinking that if we start with an allocation of, say, $7,000 or something, and see where it leads us, and it'll get us to the next meeting, and then we'll have a better idea of whether we need more, unless someone else has another thought.
Dave?
Just question on what we're communicating. I mean, are we putting it out there to get RFPs as well as where we're at in the process and what we're looking for? I'm not sure what the message that we really want to get out there is.
I think that becomes a conversation for a task group to deliver what the messaging is. But to Tucker's point, we have that information to deliver. We have an RFP to deliver because a lot of people don't read public notices. So how do we get them to read those?
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of
I
different
mean,
stuff.
that's-
Yeah.
There's a lot to communicate.
But
and I'm
the
not-
goal was to have a one-stop, you talk about the housing hub, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because the goal, wasn't it to have one place
Well,
to go?
yes, ideally, but the creation of the housing hub as we envisioned it is a much bigger project.
Right.
And so I don't want to lose the opportunity to continue to communicate with the public in the meantime while we move through the process of developing the housing hub concept, and then put, because that is a bigger project, that's going to have to go out to RFP.
Right.
And so I think, to me, we can't even craft an RFP until we know what we legally can and can't do. So we start there. And then at the next meeting, theoretically, I would love to have that answer by the next meeting, so we can have an agenda item that says, okay, this is what we want to do for an RFP. In the meantime, I think having a subgroup of this board to work with Tucker to come up with a list of the things that we want to communicate, that we think are important to communicate. And I think all the stuff we reported to the select board on Neighborhood First, the decisions we're making now about RFPs, any decisions that come out in the next couple of months, just to make sure the community knows that they entrusted us with $20 million and we're actually doing something.
Okay,
Penny?
so I just want to say there's active and there's passive communication. All that type of stuff has to be taken into account when figuring out the most effective way to do this.
Right.
So I think in my perspective is the 7,000 is, let's find a consultant to look at a marketing plan
Yeah.
in a short term and long term. Short term being by town meeting for some deliverables, and a long term, what is the creation of this effort of the housing hub?
And we have an existing website.
We do.
We do.
Used it today.
I was just curious about what form of communication were we going to be using for this? Because I know you had mentioned social media.
Right.
Social media is probably not going to be super expensive, but if we're talking about hard copies, like sending out mailers, is that something that?
That's why I want to hire an expert. Because I think that there are many channels to get to the varied audiences that we want to reach.
Right.
And I think, is an ad in the Inky worthwhile? There's still a bunch of people that read the Inky. And then there's people under the age of 30 who don't, that's not where they get their information. So that's why the expertise is critical.
Yeah, radio ads.
Yeah.
Tucker, you had a comment?
Well, I think it would be a great plan if there were a couple of folks on the trust. I can think of two off the top of my head who could work with me between now and the next meeting and come with like a particular priority list of things we need and want to communicate before town meeting and the cost of so doing, so you can approve a particular budget at that point. In addition, I'm sure in that time frame we could also at least begin to explore with the town IT folks what might be involved on that front. And I'm just going to say, since Brooke and Reba were so involved with the Housing Hub application, if they were so willing, that might be.
Sure.
Unless someone else wants to.
So,
Let's make it 3.
Great, excellent.
excellent.
All right.
All right, so it looks like we have a subcommittee formed to work on this, and then,
I'll make a motion that.
Great.
That Rima, Brooke, and Dave serve on the subcommittee, the communications plan subcommittee.
and so the goal of that group will be to come back for the next meeting with a proposal for funding for hiring a consultant and what their outline of their job would be.
And a communications plan.
Second the motion.
Do I have a second on the motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed unanimously. Thank you, Penny. Okay, jumping down to 2020 town meeting. We have housing-related warrant articles. First one, zoning bylaw amendment to alter secondary dwelling definition to add a requirement that one of the 2 dwelling units on the lot be owner-occupied. Brooke?
So I attended the planning board hearings around citizens warrant articles, and I'm always amazed that there's always a complexity to all of these things that we don't think about. And I will give Mr. Cohen, who's here, credit for standing up and pointing out that the way that article is written, owner occupied is a very specific term.
Yeah.
And it was, the planning director went through it at the meeting, and it is that the person who owns the property resides on the property for specific periods of time during the year. So Stephen stood up and said, well, there are folks who own investment properties who rent those year-round, and if all new secondary dwellings were subject to this article as written, those people wouldn't be able to get a secondary dwelling permit because they are not occupying it as the owner.
Thus taking units off the market that are available.
Potential units. And this applies only to future secondary dwellings, not existing secondary dwellings. But that unintended consequence was something that I hadn't really thought about. And I actually sent a note to the head of the planning board, Judith, who used to serve with us here, and said, as far as we were concerned, as far as that particular issue were concerned, to add owner occupied or occupied year round could alleviate that concern. But as with some of these citizens warrant articles, I personally have concern about these not really understanding the unintended consequences in full yet. So that would be my 2 cents.
How does that article address when the property transfers ownership? Does anybody know that?
I
Or
think if it exists,
It's grandfather.
it's grandfathered.
you can use them any way you want.
Right, but it would set up a second class of secondary dwellings,
Right.
Who's gonna enforce it? Is it zoning?
Yeah.
and that was also raised.
Any second dwelling built under this restriction
Microphone.
could only be used in that way.
Stephen, can you go to the,
Was that M&M's?
No.
No.
Tater chips.
Yeah, so
Grab them.
under the way it's written, any second dwelling built under that permit would only be available if the property was owner occupied. So if a property was not owner occupied, it could not be used for rentals.
So that would obscure neighborhood first properties that were built that had more than one unit on them from
Correct.
being available to be used.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
We
Right. So we
get a
couldn't
permit.
get permits
Yeah.
for second dwellings.
And is the intention, do you think, behind this article to keep people from having multiple units on a lot and just using them as a business?
So the proponent's stated purpose was to prevent speculators from building estate lots for summer, rentals. But I think he doesn't see the difference between the same model is if you're building employee housing or if you're building year-round housing. It doesn't matter if it's fancy summer people or if it's workforce housing. I would say most of our peak season housing of like, you know, April through October is second dwellings of, you know, I mean, it would eliminate employee housing, it would eliminate multiple investment properties that have year-round housing, and it would eliminate that sort of peak seasonal stuff. Even if you have the year-round thing, it would create problems for that seasonal employment issue. And I don't know how you distinguish between that and summer rentals. I guess you could say you could make it a requirement of like 90 days or more or something. But
Who is the proponent of this article?
Fritz McClure.
McClure.
So often there are unintended consequences, aren't there? Yeah.
There's a lot of problems with this that need to be flushed out. I think that the problem, and I think Fritz's problem with that is just that the more confusing you start making these articles, you might as well just not even do it. So,
Right.
you know, I'm not gonna say that Stephen's wrong. I mean, there's definitely a lot of unintended consequences that, you know, will they be worked out by this town meeting? I doubt it. Maybe we see this again at a special town meeting in the fall, probably, but hopefully with some of these issues addressed.
Any other questions on that one? Okay. Hearing no more questions, we'll move on to the next one, rural affordable development. Stephen has come as the proponent of this article to address the group, so why don't you start?
Sure. So I represent a property owner who came up with, originally wanted to propose this in a couple of different ways, and it's morphed over time. So it was originally, the idea was to do a subdivision of a single lot in Town Evers West, and the idea was to try to do it as a friendly 40B. And when we worked on that, we talked to people in the town, we talked to people at the state, and they all thought that the program that we were proposing was good because it was taking a 4-acre lot, cutting it into 4 lots, half of which would be affordable, and those were going to be run by the Housing Nantucket. Unfortunately, under the 40B rules, because of the financial restriction rules, it doesn't really work if the homeowner keeps the lots. It's designed really as a sales process. So we couldn't quite figure out how to make it work for the homeowner to keep one or both of the market rate lots. So we decided to come back and think of, well, how can we have essentially a local version of a 40B that would allow for 50% development of these lots at the affordable housing, under the Affordable Housing Covenant Program, and also have market rate lots for the homeowners. So, you know, the proposal is essentially to allow lots of 120,000 square feet or more in the Lug 2 or Lug 3 district, or was to allow for lots in the Lug 2 and Lug 3 district of 120,000 square feet or more to be divided into lots, as many as 4 lots, 2 of which would have to be affordable housing restricted, and all of which would be limited to 1 dwelling. So you'd get a lot that it could essentially have 3 dwellings now, a primary, secondary, and a tertiary, and in exchange for having the 2 affordable restrictions and the restrictions on 1 dwelling per lot, you'd essentially have 1 extra dwelling. You're making
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Are tertiary dwelling units allowed in Lug 1 and Lug 2?
2 and 3, I think so.
Or 2 and 3, rather?
Yeah.
But not if you have a covenant.
No,
All right,
they are. Yeah, I know they are because
Okay.
I've addressed it on a couple of times. So-
Just for clarification,
Sure.
also, right now, anybody in any zoning district can covenant the property and create 1 affordable unit.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So, you know, it basically boils down to the issue that Nat Lowell says so eloquently, we can't make more dirt, right? So we have to decide what's the right size for allowing for development. And, you know, he often points out that these lots are 2 or 3 football fields wide or large. So, you know, they're not that small, not that dense. So the point would be to allow for two affordable restricted lots and 2 market rate lots, all of which would each have only 1 house on it. And those are further limited based on just where they are by the septic systems, which only allow for a limited number of bedrooms. If you've got 160,000 square feet, you can only get 16 bedrooms on a conventional septic system. And you also have to make the septic and well work. There's a number of, you know, Title V issues there. There's been some, so if you look at the warrant article proposal that you have, basically what it says is the restriction that I said, but also it allows for it to be done by special permit, where the planning board would be able to put restrictions in place to allow for screening and buffering and height restrictions and grade changes and whatever, so that it wouldn't be some sort of unfettered, overdevelopment. If there was something that seemed like it wasn't a great idea, the planning board would have the ability to restrict that within the permit. The feedback that we had was that so the other thing, the other information that you have in front of you, the colored map shows all of the lug 2 and lug 3 on Nantucket. And you can see there's sort of that beige in the middle, the light beige in the middle is all the other zones, but basically most of the east and west side is that more orangey beige, and then there's the dark orange. So the dark orange is lug 2 and the orangey beige is lug 3. The green lots are the lots within those two zones that are more than 120,000 square feet. Some of those would get screened out if the town GIS screened out all of the lots in conservation, but if you actually did a deeper screening, you would get there's things like there's open space restrictions, there's the Holgate pit, there's other lots that you would screen out if you really did this. But it shows you there's not that many lug 2 and lug 3 120,000 square foot lots.
A lot of them being waterfront are so valuable, nobody's
Yeah,
gonna do
right.
this.
So and if you look at it
Wetlands.
realistically, most of them would never do this. So it's unlikely to happen in Pacoma.
Ground coverage
That would be
Special
within the zoning district. So you'd have
same.
for each lot or for the 4 in total?
for each lot. So you'd end up with the 1,500 square foot for each lot.
So it would go over
No,
what
you
the
could have
allowed.
2,000. You could
What?
have
Oh,
2,000.
right. Well, for the lots that are 4,000, that are 40,000.
40,000.
Yeah. So if
Yeah,
a
which
lot
they
is
all
more
are,
than
right
40,000
there,
square
yeah.
feet, it could have 2,000, and if it's less than 40,000 square feet, it'd have 1,500. So you would end up with potentially with more ground cover,
Yeah.
or with one extra building, and potentially slightly larger buildings.
Would you anticipate shared septic systems?
Yeah, almost definitely.
Yeah.
You'd have to do shared septic systems. It would be highly unlikely that you could make the wells and septic work if you had multiple systems.
So,
So-
go ahead, Penny.
No, I'm sorry, just, you're right, that the planning board, in doing so, would determine that not have an adverse impact on the rural nature of the area. What about all the people that bought out there with large lot zoning,
Yeah.
assuming that it would always be like that?
So this would not be that much of a change from what could happen now. It would be some change, but the Tom Nevers people showed up in force at the last planning board meeting and said, nobody wants this, we've never wanted it, no zoning changes in Tom Nevers. And I live in Tom Nevers, and I don't really want a zoning change in Tom Nevers either, because I like the rural nature of it. But there's a big difference between upzoning so that you have more development and allowing for development so that you can have an affordable housing option. You basically can't get affordable housing into the covenant program without allowing for some subdivisions. And basically you could do a one lot covenant subdivision now. So the question is, if you've got 4 acres, could we do 2? Right? Is that too dense to allow it to double over so that you've got, lots, 1 acre and a half acre, so that or 1 acre each, so that you had 4 lots.
Did you consider doing one, or did your client consider doing one market rate lot and 2 covenant properties?
We have, but the lots are so big as it is now, and frankly, in this particular circumstance, they want to get 2 because there's 2 owners who don't live together anymore. But the 50% affordable is double the affordable requirement under the 40B law.
So I have a couple of questions. So we refer to the 40B, but the covenant program doesn't qualify in the 40B. So are you prepared to do a restriction at 80% on one of the covenant lots? So if you can create one covenant now, would you create one covenant and one 80% lot so it was a shy qualified?
So we haven't talked about doing that. We could, but it makes it difficult to make the economics work because selling a lot and building a house at the 85% affordable rate is next to impossible. And the only way it really works in 40Bs is that they get, massive increases in the number of lots that you could otherwise have. So if you take
And that's where the problem came in when you said the 40B didn't make sense. It was an economics issue of trying to achieve 80% or less on the newly created lots? Or was there another roadblock?
No, the roadblock was that you're only allowed to have limited profit, but if the homeowner keeps 2 of the lots, then the math doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, they make too much, they make too much.
There's too much equity
Right.
there after the
Yeah.
separation. Okay.
So, the way 80%, the way the math works for 40B is you have 25% affordable, but you've got such a massive increase in your number of lots, it makes sense. So here, because we're going with such a limited development, I think that math is much harder to achieve.
Well, it's like the 7 Surfside Drive deal, right? So that was a 4-unit 40B that was 1 unit was 25%. So how do we get this to a place that it's 25% of the lots are 80% are shy qualified? Yeah.
I mean, and all due respect, Steve, I know like last meeting was brutal. And I definitely don't want to go there
Yeah.
with you.
About the planning board.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was horrible. But so you're here to kind of try to get us to say this is a good idea to help you with the planning board, and which is fine. I'm not. Yeah. Okay.
Well, partially just to inform you about it,
Okay.
and as a bonus, if you decided it was a good idea,
Yeah,
that would
okay.
be helpful.
So,
Well put.
so I think that the part of the problem with this for the planning board was just how broad it was.
I agree.
And how many properties it would bring into play. And on the affordable part, I mean, everyone out there now has the ability to do a covenant lot. So, if we allow everyone to subdivide, so there's double the opportunities, but double of nothing is nothing. So that's not bad. I'm just saying that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
So, in my personal feeling, and I also think with the planning board, I'm not speaking for the planning board, but I really feel that if you guys really narrowed the scope of this
Yeah.
and brought it in as just those west, and say it's a pilot. Let's try this as a pilot in the western part of Tom Nevers.
Yeah.
And see how that works.
No, it's west.
It's west.
Yeah.
And see how that works and then come back, because I think.
So I love when people say stuff and then I can say, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay, yeah, because I just think that
So the original
taking
idea,
little bites of the apple.
the original
for
idea
everyone.
was not to focus on Tom Nevers West and to say, basically, this should be available anywhere. But it freaked people out, and most of it's never going to happen because a lot of this is, as Brian noted, waterfront property, and where the property values are so high, they're not likely to implement it. So why scare people over something that's more academic than realistic or practical? So we've gone back to the drawing board and looked at how do we narrow it without killing it. And the first thing you can do is cut lug 2 and just go to lug 3. And the second thing you can do is put a restriction in place that says only 4 lots, because there seemed to be some question as to whether or not you could do 6, and I don't really want to argue about it, so just limiting it to 4 is easy. And then the last thing is to just essentially select some lots within Tom Nevers West that it makes sense to do. The proponent of the article who's here actually met with Andrew Vorse, and they talked about some lots, 3 or 4 lots that might make sense. So I think what we'll do is come back. We want to talk to those landowners before we move forward, because we want to make sure that they are interested in participating before we, limit it to that. But it'll probably move forward with just a handful of lots as a pilot program.
Yeah, I just think, and that was Andrew's feedback as well, that he thought that was
Yes.
a way to
Yeah.
get a more positive.
Yeah, try it in a limited way.
I
So
agree.
I think what we'd end up with is if the program maxed out, you'd have lots that are right now 4 acres with 2 houses that are essentially not year-round affordable, right? The only market use of a 4-acre lot with 2 houses is like as a summer estate, right? But if you cut it into 4 lots, and the 2 of those lots have 1 house, and 2 of those lots also have 1 house but are covenant restricted, you're creating, a more accessible year-round affordable lot in the market rate lots, and you're obviously creating year-round lots with the covenant lots. you're not hitting the shy list, but the covenant program is still a good affordable housing option.
If I may, for you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The tertiary dwelling report that you all have, and I can put it up on the screen if need be. The original motion was amended on the floor to say no more than 120 building permits the first year. Now, obviously, that's well in excess of what we're talking about, but the idea was to cap because it was a pilot program.
That's right.
So that might be a way to.
Yeah, there's a history of it, and I think if we saw, 3 or 4 or 5 of these 4-acre lots get cut up into 1-acre lots that had one house on them, that might not be the sky has fallen.
It's not as insulting to the rural character.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think being sensitive to the neighborhood is important. So
I'd love to figure out a way how to bridge that 80 to 120 economic issue to get any of these as shy qualified units. And I don't know what that is, and if it's in the future RFP or Housing Nantucket or some kind of subsidy, if the program, was approved.
So the issue with what's it, 70 Surfside, 4 Surfside, what's that?
7 Surfside Drive
Yeah.
Road.
So the advantage that program had, which I'm sure you guys already know, but just for the record, is it's all one lot, right? So you only needed one unit to qualify to get all of them on the shy list, and that wouldn't be the same case here. If you had one unit qualify, it wouldn't apply to the other ones. And the other thing is that's owned by Housing Nantucket, so they were able to not, worry about the money in the same way because they're.
Yeah, one wouldn't get us 4, but one would get us 1.
It's not
Correct.
a 40B.
Right.
It's not a 40B, yeah.
They came in and they were approved.
The zoning got changed there, though.
So
Tucker, do you want to step to the mic?
I mean, I think those suggestions that Dave and Stephen were talking about sound like they make a lot of sense. I guess the one other question I had just is, and maybe my math is just bad today, but like we're talking about 4 acres, but it's 120,000 square feet. So I guess my question is, why not just limit it to 4-acre parcels?
yeah, so the original proposal was lots of 120,000 or greater in the lug 2 or lug 3.
Yeah.
But if we went to lug 3, we'd probably limited it like 159.9 or something.
Okay, great. Anybody have continued questions?
So just my understanding is that the hearing stays open, right, till the 27th?
Yeah,
Meeting on the 27th?
we're currently continuing until the 27th, but we may request to continue to the February meeting because once the warrant is published, it doesn't really matter which meeting you're at.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be published this week. But the goal is to identify a small handful of parcels that are the most ripe for this, that are all 150, 160,000 square feet, that have frontage on both sides, that where the well and septic works, where the owner is a interested party, so that we would actually do something without being overwhelming. And I think if we had, say, 5 lots that created 10 affordable units and 10 1-acre units, that would be a good impact in that area. So the thing I think we need to get away from is the idea that, or the concept that development to create affordable housing is somehow ruining the neighborhood. Not to get too deep into it, but at the first planning board meeting, this couple drove in from Summit, New Jersey, and talked about how not everybody who works in Manhattan has an expectation that they live in Manhattan, and some people got to take the boat or the ferry or train from New Jersey or whatever, and I just found that so insulting.
Totally detached from reality.
Yeah, so because those people moving into their neighborhood, we're gonna ruin it, and that is not, I think, a good public policy perspective.
Stephen, can you remind me, have we done anything with the paper roads out there as a community, or they're all still intact? And
Most of them are laid out, not well.
but laid out, we haven't disposed any of them. They're all still
No,
there.
my
They're all there for frontage.
Yeah, they're all there for frontage.
Okay.
Just on a sidebar, do you talk to Mr. Driscoll at all to see if this worked in his?
I haven't
I spoke with Mr.
I know, I'm sorry, this is a
Gotta come on
sidebar,
up,
but
yeah.
I, just somehow there's gotta be some way this works for him as well.
Yeah, hi, Mike Etter, 12 Ipswich, the person who started this whole thing. Yeah, I spoke with Mr. Driscoll this morning, actually. We were both kind of passing through Ranger's office. And we thought it would be best just kind of limit the scope to one small
Okay,
area
okay,
first.
yeah, just-
And then if this happened, then he could go for that.
Okay.
Who is Mr. Driscoll?
He owns
That
9
property,
acres.
It's like just as the road kind of turns
It's
to
going to
the
the
right.
alphabet streets.
It's,
It's right after Clarendon
It's right-
on the right.
He owns a nearby property.
9 acres, 3 different
Huge.
3-acre
He's the
parcels.
south end of Toggenburg West, but it's three.
He owns
three or
9
four-
acres out there.
Yeah.
Massive lot area.
Yeah, he's got a lot of property.
Here's an article at town meeting this year to rezone.
To
Oh, right.
what?
Yeah.
Love one.
So Michael, you did speak to him? I'm sorry, I was trying to.
Yeah,
it's
I
perfect
did.
for him.
And we're gonna, I guess, pursue both of these at the same time.
Thanks, sorry to sidetrack.
So I'd appreciate it if you kept us updated on how this evolves.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think what we'll do is revise the article to put in the limitations that we talked about and then submit that to you and maybe come back or whatever. But we would be looking to you to consider being positive on it if that's something that you would consider, but not today.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate the creativity.
I think at the end of the day, if we can't come up with 4 houses on 4 acres with a 50% affordable, we're all full of crap on affordable housing, right?
Thank you, Stephen.
Noted.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, let's see. Well, let's see what we have left.
We'll have something under that, which is the role of us in taking the public position.
Go ahead, Tucker.
Mr. Chair, yes, you all had asked about whether you can take a formal position on articles, and I think we furnished you with the town council input that, in fact, you can take a formal position on articles that are related to the subjects that you principally deal with. And it's entirely up to you whether you want to take a position.
Required to.
Absolutely not.
So any continued discussion on that or feeling or attitude? Does anybody want to?
I mean, is that, I guess my question is that, and I'm not speaking to or for this, but is that where we're gonna go? Are we gonna start looking at town meeting articles and giving positive recommendations? I mean, is that what we're looking to do? Is that the road we're going down?
I find it very helpful to have had the conversation we just had with the proponent, to be here,
To understand.
to understand it, to be able to thoughtfully speak about it. So does making a recommendation as a board make that happen on a regular basis? Does it make each proponent feel that they need to come here and speak to it? Does it give us an opportunity for more informed decision? I don't know. I don't know what the benefit is other than that for us to be doing it.
Well, I mean, I think the benefit for us is to help push forward well thought out initiatives for affordable housing. And if that includes giving things positive recommendations, I think it's something we should probably talk about doing. It's my feeling.
I agree.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think if
I
it's
mean, I
something
think
that's in alignment with what, our mission is, I don't see why we wouldn't.
Yeah, if someone's trying to create responsible affordable housing, we should definitely speak up in their behalf, I think, after we all decide that it's responsible, of
Right.
course.
Yep.
Yeah.
Penny, I see you.
I'm comfortable with that, but I don't want it to turn into something that is detracting our time and resources from our core mission.
Agreed.
Ken?
Just
Sorry. Please move to the mic.
Ken Bogran, Town Real Estate Specialist. Just a thought. Your process at town meeting doesn't have a process in place with respect to recommendations from different committees. So more than likely, any initiative that you would do would be in support of the materials that are available at town meeting and made available to the public, or holding meetings with respect to it. So I think it becomes an advocacy role as opposed to a commentary role. So just to, by way of background in terms of what it's likely to be, and to make sure that you're comfortable with respect to that, so that you're achieving what you're trying to do through the advocacy role as opposed to the informational role.
Penny?
Similar to what the Nantucket Land Council does, they take a position and it's an opinion, not with an underlying public hearing or statutory requirement to express a written opinion.
Right.
Now, if we are going to proffer opinions, we need to make sure that somebody is there to speak to our opinion.
Right. Yeah.
Dave?
It might just
Dave
be,
can do it.
strike everything I just said.
He's definitely going to be there.
And it might just be letting FinCom and the planning board know how we feel. I mean, and that's where it ends. I mean, but I think that it's our responsibility to help these things move forward.
Yeah.
When they make
Or
sense.
not, or not.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm
we
just,
know.
I'm just trying to create a level of understanding of what you're doing, which goes beyond the informational role into an advocacy role. And those are two very different positions that you need to think about carefully in terms of what you want to do.
So yeah, of course you can.
Piggybacking on that, can you hear me?
Yes.
The other thing is, it occurs to me, Judith Wagner's always said on the various committees she serves, it's important for her to have an understanding when the public comes to her and says, can you explain how this works? I don't understand it. Because it is mystifying and complex for the average Joe. And so the other advantage, whether or not you advocate openly and publicly, is for you to be able to respond in a cogent manner and educated manner to those people who will come up to you at the Stop and Shop or on social media. And also to, when there's blowback on social media that's based on inaccuracies. So I think it's really just, I mean, it's great to have that, Stephen presenting, and you can ask him questions in the feedback loop of that. So just more about being informed as well.
So I feel like this is an item for the marketing, in a sense, the marketing group to be thoughtfully thinking of, and us, and what the timeline of any outgoing town meeting marketing is for us to be making our opinion cohesive in a timeline that works, right? So we want to have an opinion by the March meeting on these items, or sooner.
Yep.
Okay. All right, great. We do have executive session today, and there are a lot of items in it. The one thing left on here that I'd like to address is the tertiary dwelling analysis and evaluation. If we can do that in a short period of time. Is there anything else that anyone else wants to dive into on this? Any member of the public? No. So, Brooke, go ahead.
I just feel like I feel that we have other things that are more pressing
Yep.
than this.
I
Like,
just wanted you to have it because you asked.
no,
Yeah, no,
I appreciate it.
I'd like to
Yeah.
cover the tertiary because there was a lot of
I
work
just
put
want to
into
say,
it, and
good job,
Yeah,
Eleanor.
thank you, Eleanor.
yeah.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Do you mind if we cover, Eleanor? Can we cover this now?
Of course.
Okay,
Whatever
great.
you want. Let me just let, I just have to text the IT guy.
No, not to shut it off yet, because we
No,
want to
we-
cover tertiary first.
I know,
Okay,
just, I have to give him 10 minutes warning.
got it.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Should we go ahead?
Yeah, let's go ahead. So on the tertiary dwelling analysis and evaluation, report, I think it's, the kind of, the question came about, Penny, help me out, I think you had asked, why is it not being used, or is it being used effectively,
Yeah, or
or?
how much is it being used was
Yeah.
really the question. I was shocked it was so low.
I was encouraged
Oh,
that there were 81 of them.
Yeah.
After hearing that no one's using it, I thought that was
81
kind of
in
nice.
5 years, yeah, and then I guess maybe I was thrown by the building permit cap of 120.
First year, then they got.
First year.
Yeah, okay.
That's why I put that amendment in.
So I feel like we anticipated more, but you're right, Rima, it's 81 that weren't here before, so.
Now, if I remember correctly, this came to the table as an effort of, it was Richard Ray originally to try and get illegal units onto the record so people could, it wasn't necessarily in creating new, but it was to get existing units on the books. Of these permits, of the 81, do we have any idea how many were pre-existing that then got permitted versus newly developed?
No, I could do a deeper dive, but when I saw the numbers, I wasn't gonna pull building department files until
Right.
I saw the numbers, and when I saw 81, I didn't have time to do that.
No problem.
I would be interested to see, but it would be a couple days for me to kind of gather everything into a nice spreadsheet for you.
I would think, Dave, do you have any recollection of the 30 in 2019? Because that was during your tenure. Do you have any recollection of those were new ones?
I know that there's a few that came through that I looked at the GIS or looked at the satellite map and said, well, it already exists. Why are they doing this?
I think it's about, I was the
So-
planning board administrator for the first 2 years of this, before Holly started, and it was a lot of validating existing,
Units, yeah.
but there were some new ones, for sure, or
Or
converting garage apartment and some garage.
Bingo, scrambling stuff that didn't have a kitchen in it
Right.
when they built it, but now they're adding it so the structure existed.
Or they turn a secondary into a tertiary because it meets the 650, and then they build a secondary, so.
Right,
it's-
opens up for new, yeah.
There's a lot of that.
Yeah, I'll bet it's a lot of studios that got turned into
Dwelling units.
dwelling units.
Right. And I think that was some of the, if I remember correctly, Richard talking about it as he was outgoing from the health department. I feel like this was an initiative that he was pushing.
Was not Tobias involved in sponsoring this?
No, that was tiny dwellings.
Oh, I'm mixing it
That
up
was
with,
Yeah.
Isaiah
oh,
Stover.
thank you, sorry,
That's
Even
tiny house.
smaller.
Yeah.
tiny houses.
I came at the same time in 20.
Right, and that kind of morphed into
got it
this as
mixed
a
up,
small
yeah.
unit because that wasn't going to meet building code. Right.
The other question that I would have is, as far as, is there there's probably no enforcement mechanism for the requirement that one dwelling on the property be owner occupied or year-round occupied unless it's reported. Is there active enforcement?
Well, for instance, I do inspections for these, and if I see that, I mean, there's multiple things you can do if you look at the way it's fleshed out in the second version of it, but it's in terms of the owner, and they've changed owner occupied. And,
Yeah.
you know, Dave Fredericks came along and there was an amendment, so it has undergone some finessing. But I always require when I do an inspection, and I'm not the only one, that there be some proof that one of the owners is residing there, like the tax rolls or something like that. So we have proof in the building permit file, but it's true, if someone wants to provide that and then move, we don't necessarily know until something's reported.
Okay.
But it is enforceable.
Yeah.
And
And
enforcement's been ticked up. You guys they're making a much bigger effort.
so maybe this falls into the marketing that people don't understand that whether or not they can do it. Or it's one of those things that it's obviously working as time goes on because the numbers doubled from one year to the next to the next.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
it's blowing up.
Right. And whether it's, I don't think it matters whether it's conversion of studios or new construction. It's habitable units that have permits.
Yes, but do they ever see the rental market?
Year-round room.
Yeah,
I would think so.
I would think a lot of them don't.
What do you mean?
I mean, the ones that I've seen are, and I don't get it, but the ones I've seen, like we did one up on, what's the one up past Lincoln Circle, that road, Sherburne, not Sherburne, but
Sherburne
the other one,
Turnpike?
Kimball. There's no way someone was living in there year round.
There's a tertiary up there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Never know.
Put Eleanor
I
on
think
it.
it was 19 Kimball or something. You were, I don't think you were.
No, but I see them, I do the inspections.
Yeah,
Full-time caretaker, maybe?
Yeah, that's,
maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe that's Clint.
I don't know.
Anyway.
It's
Okay.
hard to tell. Yeah.
Well, this is super helpful. It's interesting to see the growth and the doubling over time in the permits
we
and
could, we
use.
could update it on an annual basis, just see what.
Well, and the reason we asked for this was around this question of incentivizing people to rent year-round. And so knowing how many exist, the next step is how are they used, and is there an incentive we can provide to the owners to, if it's owner occupied, to have an additional unit on the property, whether it's the secondary or tertiary, rented on a year-round basis. So, for future discussion.
What would the object be if they have them shy away?
Well,
I don't know that that was the original intent of those. It was more to get the units permitted habitable originally, and now, yeah.
In terms of what we're trying to do, we're trying to increase the amount of shy eligible units to get to a 10%. So it seems to me that the support on your part should be with respect to how to get them into the system, that not only do we have affordable housing, but we have affordable housing that in fact makes comfortable with a shy eligible unit.
Or what kind of package we can deliver to the owners
To help them get
to
it.
help them get it to a rent that's shy listed.
You're saying it better than I was.
Well, I don't know about that, but
The original discussion with us was simply to figure out a way, if possible, to incentivize to owners of tertiary dwellings to rent on a year-round basis. But whatever we can do, we should explore this further.
Okay, so let's carry that to the next meeting as an agenda item for continued discussion.
along with the cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, so I'd be looking for a motion for the other items on the agenda, other than public comment, to be carried over to the following meeting so we can jump into executive session. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. So that will open us up to public comment. We do have some members of the public here. Does anybody want to address anything before we move into executive session? Okay, I'll be looking for a motion.
I can make that motion.
Thank you.
I move that we leave open session to go into executive session, not to return to open session for the purpose of considering the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property where an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body.
We'll take a vote by roll, starting at the left. Second, thank you.
Aye, David Iverson, aye.
Penny Dye, aye.
Brooke Moore, aye.
Brian Sullivan, aye.
Rima Sherry, aye.
Charity Grace Mofson, aye.
So we'll take a quick break while we wait for the TV to get shut off.